in the narrow Jewish quarter of 18th century Frankfurt, long before Europe associated the Rothschild name with palaces, private railcars, aristocratic salons, and vast banking fortunes. There stood a small house marked by a red shield hanging above its doorway. The alleyways around it were cramped and dim, especially at night when rainwater gathered between the stones and lantern light trembled against damp walls. Carriages rarely passed through the quarter with elegance. Most wheels rolled slowly through mud and silence while merchants closed wooden shutters against the cold evening air. Inside that small house, however, another world was quietly forming. Candles burned low beside stacks of coins from distant kingdoms. Ledgers rested open across heavy wooden tables darkened by years of use. The smell of old paper mixed with melted wax and smoke from the fireplace. Somewhere beyond the narrow windows, Frankfurt settled into sleep beneath church bells and drifting rain. But inside the house of Meyer Amschel Rothschild, the night often continued for hours. He sat in silence more often than people realized. That became one of the earliest habits of the family. Observation before action, patience before ambition. Meyer Amschel understood the psychology of powerful men long before he became one himself. As a young dealer in rare coins and financial curiosities, he learned that wealthy aristocrats revealed themselves slowly. Their fears appeared during pauses in conversation. Their desires emerged through small habits. A prince who arrived late, a nobleman who examined gold too carefully, a collector who touched old coins with trembling fingers. The future founder of the dynasty watched everything, and he remembered everything. At night, after clients disappeared into the cold streets of Frankfurt, he often remained awake beside the fireplace reviewing correspondence by candlelight. The room itself was modest, yet there was already something strangely calm about the atmosphere he created. No unnecessary noise, no emotional chaos, only quiet concentration. The rain had already begun before the first carriage arrived at the banking house. It moved softly across the stone streets of Frankfurt in long silver lines, washing the dust from the narrow alleys and darkening the wood beneath the lanterns that swung above the doorways. Somewhere in the distance, church bells faded into the damp evening air, and behind the glowing windows of a modest house marked with a small red shield, candles flickered quietly against walls lined with ledgers, sealed letters, and maps of Europe. Inside, the atmosphere was warm with firelight and silence. The floors creaked softly beneath measured footsteps. Wax seals cooled beside silver letter openers. Ink dried slowly beneath careful handwriting. And in the stillness of that room, long before the family name became whispered across palaces, railway stations, salons, ministries, and private dining rooms throughout Europe, a certain habit had already begun to form. The habit was patience, not dramatic ambition, not theatrical displays of wealth, but patience so deep and disciplined that it almost resembled stillness. The man seated at the heavy wooden desk understood something that many people never would. Wealth, especially old wealth, rarely announced itself loudly. It moved quietly through rooms. It traveled inside sealed envelopes. It sat patiently beside fireplaces while others argued. It listened more than it spoke. And so, beneath the low amber glow of candlelight, with rain touching the windows and distant carriage wheels rolling slowly through the wet streets outside, the foundations of one of Europe's most mysterious dynasties were being arranged in silence. You can almost hear the soft turning of paper, the distant hiss of the fireplace, the ticking clock somewhere beyond the hallway. The Rothschild world did not begin with grandeur. That would come later, wrapped in velvet curtains, polished marble staircases, gold-framed portraits, private train compartments, and hidden dining rituals known only to those invited inside. In the beginning, there were simply rooms filled with discipline. The father taught his sons to observe before speaking, to notice the quality of a handshake, the timing of a reply, the emotional atmosphere of a room before entering it. In later years, guests inside Rothschild homes often noticed the unusual calmness of the family during moments of financial panic. While markets trembled and governments collapsed into anxiety, the Rothschild salons remained strangely composed. There was often music playing quietly somewhere in the background, a violin, a piano, sometimes nothing more than rain. Visitors later described dinners where conversations moved almost lazily, despite the fact that fortunes were shifting invisibly between nations at the same time. Crystal glasses reflected candlelight across polished tables. Silver cutlery rested perfectly aligned beside folded linen. Yet beneath the elegance there existed another layer entirely: information, timing, observation. The family understood that silence itself could become a form of luxury, and so Europe slowly changed around them. In Frankfurt, narrow streets glistened after rainstorms, while merchants closed their shutters late into the evening. In Vienna, aristocrats drifted through candlelit halls wearing dark velvet and silk gloves, their conversations dissolving into smoke from fireplaces taller than most doorways. In London, fog gathered against stone bridges while bankers travelled home through gaslit streets wrapped in heavy coats lined with wool. The Rothschilds learned each city almost like a language, not only its money, its moods, its rhythms, its hidden fears. One son would move to London, another to Paris, another to Vienna, another to Naples. Another would remain connected to Frankfurt. The arrangement itself felt almost architectural, as though Europe were becoming a great mansion and the family intended to quietly occupy every important room. Letters crossed borders constantly. Private couriers rode through storms. Wax seals carried instructions written in elegant code. Sometimes messages traveled overnight beneath layers of fabric hidden inside carriages. Sometimes they arrived folded inside books. Sometimes they were carried by trusted servants who never fully understood the importance of what rested inside their pockets. And yet, despite the growing scale of influence, the atmosphere surrounding the family remained deeply intimate. This was not a dynasty obsessed with spectacle. It was obsessed with continuity. The fireplaces were always maintained, the libraries always expanded, the dining tables always prepared carefully. The family itself became known for unusually structured evenings. Guests occasionally noticed that conversations rarely began immediately after dinner. Instead, there would be a long pause while wine was poured and candles adjusted. The silence was intentional. It allowed people to settle into honesty. In many wealthy European homes, luxury was displayed openly through chandeliers, servants, horses, jewels, and elaborate music rooms. The Rothschild houses possessed all of these things eventually, but their most unusual display of wealth was often something far less visible: control. The ability to remain emotionally untouched by chaos. In London, during cold winter evenings, private meetings unfolded inside drawing rooms lined with dark green wallpaper and towering shelves of leather-bound books. The lamps glowed softly against polished mahogany desks, while outside the city disappeared into fog. Guests arrived quietly through side entrances to avoid attentions. Cloaks were removed carefully by servants trained never to interrupt conversation. Sometimes negotiations continued deep into the night, while tea cooled untouched beside stacks of documents, and still the atmosphere remained strangely calm, almost sleepy. This became one of the hidden characteristics of old European wealth, the truly powerful, often cultivated environments that slowed time itself. Inside Rothschild homes, clocks ticked softly rather than loudly. Curtains muted outside noise. Carpets absorbed footsteps. Even arguments were conducted in restrained voices. There was a belief, almost psychological in nature, that emotional excess belonged to unstable people. Control meant permanence. and permanence was everything. As decades passed, the family's residences grew increasingly magnificent. Marble entrances appeared beneath enormous ceilings painted with mythological scenes, conservatories filled with rare plants collected from distant regions. Dining halls reflected endless candlelight across silver trays and crystal decanters. But the private spaces remained even more fascinating. The libraries. Always the libraries. Visitors often remembered them long after forgetting the formal reception rooms. Long corridors of dark wood, rolling ladders beside towering shelves, the smell of old paper warmed gently by fireplaces, globe lamps glowing beside maps marked with tiny annotations, thick curtains protecting rare books from sunlight. There was a particular kind of silence inside these rooms, not empty silence, educated silence, the silence of people accustomed to thinking slowly. Some evenings, members of the family would remain there for hours without speaking at all. A servant might enter quietly carrying tea or cognac on a silver tray before disappearing again without interruption. Outside, rain touched the windows. Inside, fortunes moved silently across Europe. The Rothschild style of wealth was deeply connected to emotional atmosphere. They understood the effect architecture could have on the mind. Long hallways encouraged slowness. Heavy curtains created privacy. Soft lighting relaxed guests. Thick carpets absorbed anxiety. Even the placement of chairs during meetings was intentional. Many wealthy families throughout Europe pursued prestige through visibility. The Rothschilds often pursued invisibility instead. This made them more mysterious. And mystery itself became a form of power. You can almost picture a private dinner somewhere in Paris during the 19th century. Snow falling beyond tall windows, gold candle holders glowing against white tablecloths, gentle conversation drifting between diplomats, collectors, aristocrats, musicians, and financiers. Somewhere near the center of the room sits a Rothschild host speaking quietly, listening carefully, revealing almost nothing. The great secret of old money was rarely greed. It was emotional discipline. The family became known for preserving wealth not only through financial intelligence, but through routines. The same habits repeated across generations. Breakfasts conducted at consistent times. Letters answered promptly. Children educated rigorously. Emotions managed carefully. Appearances maintained elegantly but never recklessly. Even leisure was structured. Country estates provided silence rather than excitement. Hunting parties unfolded with ceremonial precision. Garden walks were slow and reflective. Guests were expected to understand subtle etiquette without explanation. In many ways, the family created entire worlds designed to reduce unpredictability. And yet, Europe itself remained unpredictable. Wars rose and faded. Governments shifted, empires trembled, railways expanded across landscapes once crossed only by horses. Industrial smoke gathered over cities. Newspapers spread information faster than ever before. But inside the private rooms of generational wealth, another pace continued, a slower one, a quieter one. There were nights in Vienna when snow covered the streets so completely that the city seemed suspended in silence. Carriages moved carefully through the white darkness while servants lit additional lamps inside aristocratic homes. In certain drawing rooms, the Rothschild family hosted gatherings that blended financial conversation with music, art, politics, and culture so seamlessly that outsiders could barely distinguish where one world ended and another began. This too was part of the old money psychology. True influence was never isolated. It connected everything: music, architecture, banking, diplomacy, marriage, art collections, dinner invitations. Even seating arrangements carried meaning. Guests often noticed peculiar rituals. Certain family members preferred arriving slightly late to dinners, never early. Some carried small notebooks everywhere but rarely wrote in them publicly. Others developed reputations for remembering astonishing details from conversations decades earlier. And always there was the careful management of emotional atmosphere. The room must feel calm. The guest must feel comfortable. The conversation must never feel rushed. This ability to create psychological comfort became one of the quiet luxuries of elite European society. In London, fog pressed gently against tall windows while fireplaces glowed deep orange through winter evenings. Gentlemen leaned into leather chairs after dinner while servants refreshed candles silently. Somewhere beyond the heavy curtains, the city remained noisy and restless. Inside, time slowed. The Rothschild banking houses themselves reflected this atmosphere. Visitors expected chaos, urgency, frantic calculations. Instead, they often found composure. Clerks moved quietly. Pens scratched softly across paper. Footsteps echoed lightly through corridors. Everything appeared controlled. This was deliberate. The appearance of calm inspired trust, and trust, perhaps more than money itself, became the true currency of old banking culture. The family also cultivated another unusual habit. They collected information the way others collected art. Private letters, travel observations, political moods, economic whispers overheard during dinners. They listened constantly, but they revealed little. Guests occasionally described conversations where a Rothschild family member seemed almost absent-minded, allowing others to speak freely for long periods. Only later did those guests realize how carefully every detail had been observed. This quiet attentiveness became part of the family mythology, a kind of elegant watchfulness. And all around Europe, the atmosphere of aristocratic life continued unfolding beneath candlelight and rain. There were evenings in Paris where mirrors reflected endless golden light across ballroom walls, while orchestras played softly in distant chambers. Ladies in silk gowns drifted through conversations scented with tobacco and perfume. Crystal glasses touched gently together. But behind many of these glamorous worlds existed another quieter layer: private studies, locked cabinets, late-night correspondence, financial maps spread beneath shaded lamps. The Rothschild family occupied both realities simultaneously: public elegance, private calculation. Perhaps that is why they continue to fascinate people so deeply. They belong to a world that feels almost impossible now. A world where influence traveled by handwritten letter, where fortunes depended on patience, where luxury meant privacy, where silence itself communicated status. You can almost hear the distant whistle of a night train crossing Europe beneath cold stars. Inside one of the private compartments sits a gentleman wrapped in a dark wool coat, reading correspondence beneath a small brass lamp, while rain traces the glass beside him. The train moves through sleeping towns and frozen countryside. Somewhere ahead waits another city, another meeting, another dining room, another library. The Rothschild network expanded partly because the family understood movement, not hurried movement, purposeful movement. Railways fascinated old banking dynasties because trains represented controlled expansion. Timmy tables, precision, predictability. The luxury compartments of 19th century Europe became moving salons where conversations unfolded quietly between velvet seats and polished wood panels. Some journeys lasted through entire nights. Soft lamps swayed gently while distant landscapes vanished into darkness outside the windows. The rhythm of wheels against tracks created a hypnotic atmosphere. Many members of elite society developed strange habits during these journeys. Certain passengers requested complete silence from attendants. Others carried specific blankets, books, or teas known only to longtime servants. Wealth often revealed itself through comfort rituals invisible to outsiders. The Rothschilds were masters of this hidden comfort. Their residences, trains, gardens, libraries, and salons were designed not merely to impress but to soothe. Because a calm mind made better decisions, and better decisions preserved dynasties. Across generations, the family also maintained strong internal bonds. Marriages were considered carefully. Relationships between brothers were treated almost like extensions of the business itself. Loyalty mattered deeply, not theatrical loyalty, quiet loyalty, the kind expressed through consistency, through presence, through shared routines repeated over decades. There were stories of family gatherings where financial discussions ended abruptly the moment children entered the room. Another conversation would begin immediately, lighter and slower, protecting the atmosphere from tension. Even emotional energy was managed carefully. This emotional architecture became one of the defining characteristics of old money households. The walls themselves seemed designed to absorb panic. Heavy drapery, soft lighting, low voices, warm fires, measured schedules, private gardens enclosed from the noise of cities. Inside these protected environments, children learned subtle lessons without direct instruction. Never react too quickly, never display desperation, never interrupt silence unnecessarily. Observe first, speak second, and perhaps most importantly, maintain continuity. Because continuity was the true obsession of generational wealth. Not luxury alone. Luxury fades. Continuity survives. As Europe entered new eras of industrialization and modernity, many aristocratic families struggled to adapt. Some spent recklessly. Others disappeared beneath political change. But the Rothschild family retained an unusual ability to move quietly between worlds. Traditional enough to understand aristocracy, modern enough to understand finance, cultured enough to enter elite salons, disciplined enough to preserve control. There were mornings at country estates when mist hovered above gardens, still wet from dawn rain. Servants opened shutters silently, while fireplaces crackled back to life. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed softly. Newspapers arrived folded precisely beside breakfast trays, and already the machinery of wealth had resumed. Letters reviewed, meetings arranged, travel schedules adjusted, yet the atmosphere remained unhurried. This was another hidden luxury. The wealthy often protected themselves from visible urgency, even when enormous decisions were being made. At private dinners throughout Europe, the family became associated with a certain understated elegance. Nothing too loud, nothing too excessive, fine wine chosen carefully, conversation balanced delicately between culture and discretion. Guests sometimes noticed long pauses between topics. Nobody rushed to fill silence. This ability to remain comfortable inside silence often distinguished old money from new. Silence suggested confidence. There was no need to perform, and so the evenings unfolded slowly, candles burning lower, rain continuing beyond tall windows, footmen moving quietly through hallways lined with portraits. The portraits themselves became another fascinating aspect of dynastic life. Generations watched from painted frames across staircases and libraries. Ancestors dressed in dark formal clothing, their expressions restrained and thoughtful. In many Rothschild residences, the family history was not discussed dramatically, it was simply present, embedded into the architecture. Children grew up surrounded by continuity so complete that the past never felt distant. Old letters were preserved. Furniture passed between generations. Silverware carried family markings. Even books sometimes contained handwritten notes from ancestors decades earlier. This accumulation of continuity created a psychological effect difficult to describe. The family did not merely inherit wealth, they inherited atmosphere. The atmosphere of old Europe. Of libraries warmed by fireplaces. Of trains crossing snowy borders. Of discreet conversations beneath chandeliers. Of foggy evenings in London. of private gardens in Paris, of Vienna salons filled with music drifting softly through candlelit rooms, and always there remained the sensation that important things were happening quietly behind closed doors. Perhaps that feeling is what continues to pull listeners into stories about old banking dynasties. Not simply the money, the hidden world, the psychological distance from ordinary life, the strange elegance of restraint. There were nights when correspondence arrived so late that servants had already extinguished most of the lamps. A single study remained lit while the household slept. Outside, rain touched the windows gently. Inside, one member of the family unfolded a letter beside the fireplace and read silently for a very long time. No dramatic reaction, only thought. This emotional stillness became legendary. Some visitors even described the family as almost unnervingly calm during moments of enormous uncertainty. Financial panic might spread across markets, governments might shift, newspapers might produce alarming headlines. Yet inside certain Rothschild rooms there remained tea service, controlled voices, and carefully maintained routine. Routine itself became a stabilizing force. Breakfast at the same hour, meetings conducted in the same rooms, travel arranged with familiar attendants, letters filed methodically. The world outside could change rapidly. The interior world changed slowly. This separation between outer chaos and inner calm formed one of the deepest psychological habits of generational wealth. Protection through atmosphere. You can almost imagine entering one of their libraries late at night. The air carries the scent of old leather and fading firewood. Lamps glow softly beside stacks of correspondence. Somewhere beyond the doorway, a grandfather clock ticks with slow precision. The room itself seems untouched by urgency. And perhaps that is the true fantasy hidden within these stories. Not wealth alone, but the dream of existing beyond panic, beyond noise, beyond the exhausting pace of ordinary life. The Rothschild world represented a civilization of controlled environments, carefully protected emotional climates. Even their gardens reflected this preference for cultivated order. Paths curved deliberately through sculpted hedges and quiet fountains. Benches faced private landscapes shielded from public view. Guests walked slowly while conversations unfolded in fragments. Some evenings, the family hosted intimate musical performances where only a handful of listeners attended. Candlelight reflected against instruments, while rain whispered outside conservatory windows. The atmosphere felt less like entertainment and more like ritual. This was another old money characteristic. Experiences were curated privately. Luxury became quieter as wealth deepened. The richest rooms often contained the fewest people. In Paris, the family developed extraordinary art collections, yet even these collections reflected discipline rather than chaos. Paintings arranged carefully, lighting softened intentionally, viewing rooms designed for contemplation rather than spectacle. Visitors sometimes described feeling unusually relaxed inside these residences despite the obvious scale of wealth surrounding them. Everything had been arranged to remove friction from experience. Comfort flowed invisibly. Doors opened before being approached. Tea arrived before being requested. Silence appeared whenever needed. This nearly invisible management of atmosphere represented one of the highest forms of luxury, and behind it all remained generations of training. Servants trained carefully. Children educated rigorously. Schedules maintained precisely. Social rituals repeated consistently. The family understood something subtle about power. People trusted environments that felt calm. Even architecture became part of the psychology. Tall ceilings encouraged slower movement. Libraries created intellectual gravity. Thick curtains produced privacy. Marble hallways amplified footsteps softly, reminding guests of scale without requiring words. At night, the mansions transformed entirely. fireplaces glowing low, hallways dimmed to amber, rain tapping distant windows, footsteps fading into silence. Somewhere a servant extinguishing candles one by one. And in private studies the work continued quietly beneath shaded lamps. The Rothschild family also cultivated long memory. Not nostalgia. Memory. They remembered alliances, fathers, patterns, fires. They studied generations rather than moments. This generational thinking separated old wealth from ordinary ambition. Most people plan for years. Dynasties plan for decades, sometimes centuries. This altered their emotional relationship with time itself. Urgency became less important. Continuity became sacred. There were stories of family members walking through galleries late at night after formal dinners had ended. The guests departed. Music faded. Servants cleaned quietly below. And somewhere in the stillness of enormous houses, individuals wandered alone through rooms filled with inherited history. Portraits watched silently from walls. Candles burned low. The atmosphere became almost dreamlike. You can almost hear distant carriage wheels fading down wet streets outside, while inside the house only the clocks continue speaking. Tick, tick. The family's relationship with secrecy also fascinated Europe. Not secrecy in the dramatic sense imagined by outsiders, but social secrecy, discretion, selective visibility, private information preserved carefully, important conversations conducted away from public rooms. This discretion increased the aura surrounding the family. People projected mysteries into the silence, and silence always invites imagination. Throughout the 19th century, Europe itself often resembled an enormous stage lit by candlelight and shadow. Royal courts shimmered with ceremony. Financial districts expanded beneath industrial smoke. Luxury trains crossed borders carrying diplomats, aristocrats, bankers, and artists through sleeping landscapes. The Rothschilds moved through all of it quietly, neither fully public nor entirely hidden. A dynasty of correspondence, of salons, of libraries, of dinners stretching deep into rainy evenings. There were winter nights in London when fog became so thick that carriage lamps appeared like floating amber lights drifting through darkness. Inside private clubs and banking houses, fireplaces roared softly while gentlemen discussed politics in low voices. Somewhere nearby, perhaps in a room lined with books and maps, a Rothschild banker listened patiently while others revealed their fears. Listening itself became a form of advantage. The family understood that people often exposed their deepest anxieties during moments of comfort, and so comfort was cultivated carefully. Warm rooms, excellent wine, soft chairs, unhurried evenings. Even silence became strategic, yet none of it felt aggressive. That was the fascinating part. The atmosphere surrounding old wealth rarely felt rushed enough to resemble ambition. Instead, it resembled inevitability, as though the family simply existed naturally within rooms of influence. This psychological effect shaped the way others interacted with them. Visitors entered Rothschild spaces already expecting composure, refinement, and continuity. The environment itself reinforced those expectations. Perhaps nowhere was this more visible than during private dinners. Old European dining culture contained endless hidden rituals invisible to outsiders. Seating reflected relationships. Wine choices communicated subtle messages. Conversation moved carefully between topics considered socially acceptable for each phase of the evening. The Rothschild family mastered these codes. Guests often left their residences feeling not overwhelmed but strangely soothed, as though they had temporarily entered a world where disorder could never fully arrive. And maybe for a few quiet hours beside candlelight and rain, that feeling was real. The libraries remained central to everything. In many residences, they functioned almost like private temples of continuity. Thick carpets softened every step. Books climbed toward ceilings painted in muted colors. Lamps glowed beside reading chairs upholstered in dark leather. Sometimes family members spent entire afternoons there reviewing correspondence while storms passed outside unnoticed. The atmosphere encouraged deep thinking, slow thinking, the kind of thinking modern life rarely allows. Perhaps this is why stories about old money continue to feel hypnotic. They offer an imagined escape into environments untouched by frantic noise, worlds built around ritual instead of speed, worlds where important conversations happen beside fireplaces rather than through screens, where wealth is measured through privacy, patience, and emotional control. There were rumors of certain Rothschild routines that fascinated guests. Some family members reportedly preferred conducting difficult conversations during walks rather than across desks. Others maintained carefully timed reading schedules. Certain letters were always answered by hand regardless of circumstance. Small habits repeated over decades. These rituals created continuity between generations. And continuity created identity. Even architecture carried memory forward. Staircases worn gently by generations of footsteps. Writing desks polished by decades of correspondence. Dining rooms where the same family traditions repeated beneath changing political eras. Outside those walls, Europe transformed constantly. Inside, the atmosphere remained astonishingly stable. The contrast itself became luxurious. In Vienna during elegant winter seasons, aristocrats gathered beneath glittering chandeliers, while orchestras played through long evenings scented with wax and tobacco smoke. Yet behind the glamour, many elites feared instability, political tension, economic uncertainty, social change. The Rothschild family responded to uncertainty not with visible panic, but with greater structure, more correspondence, more observation, more discipline. There was almost a monastic quality hidden beneath the luxury, an understanding that wealth required maintenance not only financially but psychologically. Emotions must remain controlled, routines preserved, appearances calm. This did not mean the family lacked feeling. Quite the opposite. Many members became passionate collectors, patrons of music, supporters of art and architecture. But emotional expression unfolded within carefully designed environments. Private gardens, music rooms, libraries after midnight. Not chaotic public spectacle. You can almost picture one of their country estates at dusk. Rain-darkened trees surrounding gravel paths. Warm light blowing through tall windows. Somewhere inside, distant piano notes drifting softly through enormous rooms while servants prepare late tea service. The house itself seems to breathe slowly. That slowness mattered. Old money culture often treated haste as vulgar. To move too quickly suggested insecurity. And so the family cultivated measured rhythms in nearly everything: walking, speaking, hosting, negotiating. Even conflict unfolded slowly. Visitors frequently remarked upon the family's ability to remain courteous during disagreement. Raised voices were rare. Public emotional displays even rarer. Control protected dignity. Dignity protected continuity, and continuity protected the dynasty. As railroads expanded across Europe, the geography of elite society changed dramatically. Suddenly, private compartments connected London to Paris, Vienna to Frankfurt, cities once separated by exhausting journeys. The Rothschild network adapted beautifully to this new world of movement. Train stations themselves became strangely luxurious environments for the upper classes. Porters carrying monogrammed luggage beneath iron arches filled with steam. Brass lamps reflecting across polished carriages. Conductors speaking softly while snow gathered outside. Inside first-class compartments, the atmosphere resembled miniature drawing rooms. Velvet seats, folded blankets, soft lighting, the rhythmic sound of wheels crossing tracks through darkness. Many wealthy travelers slept lightly during these journeys, waking occasionally to glimpse distant villages glowing beneath moonlight before disappearing again into sleep. There was something deeply soothing about controlled movement through uncertain landscapes. Perhaps that sensation mirrored the psychology of old wealth itself. Protected interiors moving steadily through chaotic history, the family also developed remarkable social endurance. Generations learned how to navigate aristocrats, politicians, artists, industrialists, and diplomats without fully belonging to any single world. This produced a fascinating emotional flexibility. At one dinner, they might discuss opera, at another, railways, at another, agriculture, architecture, or diplomacy. The ability to move gracefully between worlds became another hidden form of power. And always the atmosphere remained composed, candles glowing, rain whispering, fireplaces breathing warmth into marble rooms. There were evenings when guests departed Rothschild residences feeling unable to explain exactly what had impressed them most. The paintings, the silver, the libraries, the conversations. Perhaps it was something less visible, the emotional texture of the experience itself. The sensation that every detail had been anticipated before arrival. That is the quiet genius of old luxury. It removes friction so gently that comfort feels inevitable. Even silence feels curated. As decades became generations, the Rothschild mythology expanded across Europe. Newspapers speculated. Rivals observed. Admirers attempted imitation. But certain qualities remained difficult to copy. The patience, the continuity, the atmosphere. These things require time. And time, perhaps more than money, became the family's greatest possession. There were rooms within certain residences rarely shown to outsiders. Small private studies filled with correspondence. Intimate breakfast rooms overlooking gardens. Quiet upstairs libraries where family members escaped formal gatherings below. These hidden rooms often revealed more about elite psychology than the grand halls designed for public admiration. Comfort over spectacle. Privacy over display. Soft lamplight over glittering excess. One strange habit occasionally mentioned by visitors involved the management of sound itself. Doors closed gently. Servants walked silently. Conversations rarely echoed. Wealthy households understood that noise created tension. Silence relaxed the nervous system, and relaxed people revealed themselves more honestly. This understanding of atmosphere bordered almost on psychological architecture. The Rothschild world was designed not merely to house wealth, but to preserve emotional composure. Perhaps that is why their story feels so hypnotic during quiet nights. Because beneath the history lies a deeper fantasy, a fantasy of protected interiors, of warm libraries during storms, of continuity surviving chaos, of measured voices beside candlelight while the restless world remains outside. Late into certain evenings, after dinners ended and guests departed into foggy streets, the houses settled into extraordinary stillness. Footsteps disappeared upstairs. Embers glowed quietly within fireplaces. Rain softened against windows. And somewhere, often alone beneath a shaded lamp, a member of the family continued reading correspondence from another city. Paris, Vienna, London, Frankfurt, Naples. The network remained alive through letters, paper carrying information across borders faster than rumor. The handwriting itself became recognizable between generations. Elegant, controlled, disciplined. Even penmanship reflected character. This attention to detail extended everywhere. Clothing tailored carefully but conservatively. Rooms arranged symmetrically. Schedules maintained with almost ritual consistency. Old wealth often feared unpredictability more than expense, and so predictability became luxurious. Meals appearing on time, trains departing precisely, candles always prepared before dusk, libraries always warm. The world beyond the gates might feel unstable. Inside the gates, continuity endured. There were mornings after heavy rain when gardens smelled of wet stone and earth. Conservatory windows glowed pale beneath cloudy skies. Servants moved quietly through corridors carrying fresh flowers into reception rooms before visitors arrived. Every detail contributed to atmosphere, and atmosphere shaped memory. Guests remembered how they felt inside these spaces long after forgetting the specific conversations. Calm, protected, observed, soothed. This emotional precision represented one of the deepest arts of elite European culture, not simply acquiring wealth, but designing environments capable of preserving psychological control across generations. As night deepens across Europe, imagine the final lamp still glowing inside a Rothschild residence, somewhere beyond rain-darkened gardens. The house is quiet now, most doors closed, most fireplaces reduced to embers. Only the library remains awake. Leather chairs resting beneath pools of amber light. A clock ticking softly beside shelves of old books. Letters stacked neatly upon a desk polished by generations. Outside, carriage wheels fade slowly into the wet darkness. Inside, the silence continues. And within that silence lives the true atmosphere of old money. Not loud luxury, not spectacle, but continuity, patience, discipline, warmth against uncertainty. A civilization built around the management of emotional atmosphere. The Rothschild family became one of its greatest symbols, not because they spoke the loudest, but because they understood the strange power of moving quietly through history. Even now, long after the candlelit salons and handwritten ledgers of 19th century Europe have faded into memory, the atmosphere remains strangely alive. Rain against windows, soft footsteps in marble hallways, libraries glowing beneath shaded lamps, private trains crossing dark countryside, distant conversations drifting through elegant rooms while clocks continue their patient rhythm deep into the night. And somewhere in that quiet world, hidden behind velvet curtains and polished doors, the old rituals continue softly. A letter unfolded carefully, a fire adjusted gently, a pause before speaking, a silence long enough to think, a dynasty breathing slowly through history while Europe sleeps around it. But the story of the Rothschild family was never simply the story of money. It was the story of movement, of survival, of discipline carried across generations like a secret inheritance, long before the great mansions of Paris and London, before private dining halls glowing with candlelight, before collections of art and polished marble staircases, there was uncertainty. The Jewish quarter of Frankfurt existed under layers of restriction. Gates closed at night. Families lived crowded together behind walls that separated them from the wider city. Opportunities arrived slowly. Permission itself often depended on aristocrats who viewed wealth as acceptable only when it remained useful. Young Mayer Emschel Rothschild learned this atmosphere intimately. He understood what it meant to live close to power without truly belonging to it. Perhaps this created the emotional foundation of the dynasty, because people who grow up near great wealth without fully possessing it often become extraordinary observers. They study behavior, timing, weakness, pride, silence. Mayer Amschel spent years building trust carefully through rare coins, antiques, and financial dealings. He cultivated relationships slowly, especially with aristocratic collectors fascinated by history and prestige. Wealthy men often relaxed around him because he appeared calm, intelligent, and patient. Patience became his greatest weapon. And patience is often invisible. There were cold mornings when frost gathered along the narrow windows of his office while he sorted foreign coins beneath candlelight before sunrise. Outside, Frankfurt remained grey and silent beneath winter mist. Inside, the future of the dynasty was being built one careful relationship at a time. Not loudly, never loudly. The Rothschild style would eventually become famous for exactly this quality. Quiet expansion, quiet influence, quiet control. Even in later generations, guests often remarked that the family rarely appeared rushed. They moved through conversations with unusual calmness, as though operating according to clocks hidden from the rest of society. Mayer Amschel eventually gained access to one of the most important figures of his era, Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse. The prince possessed immense wealth, and like many aristocrats of Europe, he required intelligent financial management. Their relationship transformed the future of the family. Yet even then, the atmosphere remained strangely intimate. Imagine the evenings. Rain tapping softly against windows. Documents spread across dark wooden tables. A servant entering quietly with warmed wine. Candles reflecting against gold coins and wax seals. The slow construction of trust. Old money relationships rarely formed through excitement. They formed through repetition, reliability, controlled emotions. The prince began trusting Mayer Amschel with larger responsibilities. Information traveled privately between rooms lined with books and heavy curtains. Financial correspondence crossed borders, hidden inside leather satchels carried through storms and snow. Europe itself was beginning to change. Empires expanded, trade intensified, wars approached, and amid all this movement, the Rothschild family discovered the great opportunity of their age. Networks. The family understood something extraordinary long before most people did. Speed of information could create power greater than armies. So Mayer Amschel began preparing his sons, not casually, methodically. Amschel, Salomon, Nathan, Karl, James. 5 sons trained almost like parts of a single machine, yet their education extended beyond finance. They were taught atmosphere, discipline, observation, how to enter elite rooms without appearing intimidated, how to remain calm during uncertainty, how to preserve dignity regardless of circumstance. The family dinner table itself became part classroom, part strategy room. Candles flickered while conversations moved between politics, trade routes, noble families, military developments, and social behavior. The sons learned that wealth depended as much on understanding human emotion as understanding numbers. One son might notice anxiety in a diplomat's voice. Another might remember details from a conversation months earlier. The father listened carefully to everything. Sometimes the family remained at the table long after meals ended. No rushing, no wasted motion. The room warm from firelight, while outside the streets of Frankfurt disappeared into darkness. As the sons reached adulthood, Mayer Amschel executed the plan that would define the dynasty forever. He sent them outward into Europe, not randomly. Strategically, Amschel remained in Frankfurt. Salomon moved toward Vienna. Nathan traveled to London. Karl established himself in Naples. James eventually settled in Paris. It was as though the family quietly placed itself inside the bloodstream of Europe. 5 cities, 5 brothers, 1 network. Letters began moving constantly between them. Private couriers crossed borders through rain, snow, and political instability, carrying coded information sealed in wax. Some messages traveled hidden inside coat linings or beneath carriage seats. Timing became everything. Nathan Rothschild in London soon emerged as perhaps the most relentless of the brothers. London during the early 19th century possessed a unique atmosphere. Fog rolled through narrow streets beside the Thames. Financial houses glowed softly beneath gas lamps. Gentlemen in dark coats hurried through wet evenings while carriage wheels echoed against stone. Nathan moved through this world with astonishing intensity, yet even he maintained the family style of emotional control. He worked obsessively, rose early, demanded precision, built relationships carefully. At night, he often remained awake reviewing correspondence beside fireplaces long after others had retired. The Rothschild homes gradually became known for strange contrasts. Immense activity hidden beneath extraordinary calm. Servants moved silently. Meetings unfolded behind closed doors. Clocks ticked steadily. Everything appeared composed. This atmosphere became psychologically powerful. People trusted environments that felt stable. Nathan understood this instinctively. There were evenings in London when rain covered the city in silver reflections, while inside Rothschild offices, clerks sorted information arriving from across Europe. Military movements, government borrowing, market conditions, political rumors. The family processed information faster than many governments. But they never advertised this openly. Discretion remained sacred. The Napoleonic Wars transformed Europe into a continent of anxiety and uncertainty. Armies moved constantly. Borders shifted. Kingdoms trembled. For many families, this era brought chaos. For the Rothschilds, it brought expansion, not because they created the instability, but because they understood how to operate inside instability without losing emotional control. This became one of the defining psychological traits of the dynasty. Calm during turbulence. While Europe panicked, the brothers exchanged letters. While governments struggled, the family maintained structure. There is something deeply hypnotic about imagining those nights. A private room in London glowing beneath candlelight. Maps spread across tables. A courier arriving soaked from rain. A sealed message opened slowly. Nathan reading silently while the fireplace breathed warmth into the room. No dramatic reaction. Only thought. The Battle of Waterloo later became permanently connected to Rothschild mythology. Stories spread throughout Europe about Nathan receiving news of Napoleon's defeat before others in London. Some tales became exaggerated over time, transformed by rumor and imagination. But what mattered most was not the legend itself. It was what the legend represented. Information. Speed. Composure. The public began viewing the family almost as mysterious operators moving silently behind the visible surface of Europe. And mystery increased fascination. As wealth expanded, so did the scale of their surroundings. The modest rooms of Frankfurt evolved into grand residences across Europe. In Paris, James Rothschild cultivated extraordinary salons where politicians, artists, aristocrats, musicians, and financiers gathered beneath chandeliers in candlelight. Conversations drifted through enormous rooms lined with paintings and mirrors reflecting warm gold light deep into the evening. Yet, despite the elegance, discipline remained underneath everything. Guests were observed carefully, conversations remembered, relationships cultivated slowly. The Rothschild salons became famous not simply because of luxury, but because of atmosphere. The family understood how to make important people feel simultaneously relaxed and significant. That is a rare talent. At dinners in Paris, servants moved with near invisibility between guests seated at long polished tables. Crystal glasses shimmered beside silver candle holders while soft music drifted from distant rooms. Outside, rain often touched the city softly. Inside, Europe's elite exchanged ideas over wine and candlelight. Some visitors later wrote about the unusual quietness of the Rothschild homes. Despite immense wealth, the atmosphere rarely felt chaotic. No shouting, no theatrical displays, only controlled elegance. The family had learned generations earlier that emotional stability itself could become a luxury. In Vienna, Salomon Rothschild entered the deeply ceremonial world of the Austrian Empire. Vienna possessed another rhythm entirely. Grand carriages moved through wide boulevards beneath winter snow. Opera houses glowed at night with aristocratic audiences wrapped in velvet and fur. Music drifted through salons where diplomats and nobles discussed politics beneath painted ceilings. Salomon adapted perfectly. The Rothschild family always studied the emotional culture of each city before fully entering it. London required discipline, Paris required charm, Vienna required elegance, Frankfurt required memory, Naples required flexibility. This ability to mirror environments while preserving internal family identity became one of their greatest strengths. And still the brothers remained connected. Letters crossed Europe endlessly. Some evenings, family members waited beside fireplaces for important correspondence expected to arrive before dawn. Servants listened for carriage wheels outside while clocks moved slowly through the night. There is something deeply cinematic about these scenes. The old Europe of handwritten power, wax seals, private couriers, libraries filled with maps, a continent managed through correspondence and patience. As the 19th century progressed, the Rothschild fortune became almost unimaginable to ordinary people. But strangely, the deeper the wealth became, the quieter many aspects of family life grew. This is one of the hidden truths of old money. The highest levels of wealth often moved toward privacy instead of visibility. The family collected art privately, hosted intimate dinners, maintained country estates hidden behind gates and gardens, preserved routines. Children were raised within carefully controlled environments designed to continue the dynasty psychologically as well as financially. Young Rothschild children grew up surrounded by rituals. Breakfast served precisely, letters written properly, music education, language study, formal manners, emotional restraint. The atmosphere inside these homes shaped identity from an early age. Libraries played a central role. Always the libraries. Rooms lined floor to ceiling with books bound in leather and gold lettering. Warm firelight resting against polished wood. Reading tables positioned beneath shaded lamps. Heavy curtains muting the noise of the outside world. Visitors often remembered the silence. A cultivated silence. The silence of generational thinking. Some evenings, family members disappeared into these libraries for hours, while rainstorms rolled across gardens beyond the windows. The houses seemed suspended outside ordinary time. That suspension became part of the allure. The fantasy of old wealth is often not money itself. It is insulation from chaos, protection from urgency. The feeling that behind thick walls and warm lamps, the world slows down. By the middle of the 19th century, the Rothschild name carried enormous influence across Europe. Governments borrowed through them. Railways expanded with their support. Art collections grew. Palaces emerged. Yet the family continued behaving with remarkable caution. They understood how quickly fortunes could disappear. This caution shaped everything: the architecture, the routines, the marriages, the conversations. Even leisure remained disciplined. At country estates, guests followed subtle social rhythms understood without explanation. Morning walks through mist-covered gardens, afternoon tea in quiet drawing rooms, music after dinner. Long conversations beside fireplaces while rain moved across dark windows. There was luxury everywhere. But it was controlled luxury. Nothing careless, nothing emotionally reckless. You can almost imagine arriving at one of these estates during autumn. Carriage wheels crunching slowly across gravel. Tall windows glowing amber through evening fog. Servants opening doors into warm marble halls scented faintly with polished wood and burning fireplaces. Somewhere deeper in the house, distant piano music. A clock ticking softly. The sensation that the outside world has been sealed away. This was the emotional architecture of old money, and the Rothschilds mastered it completely. As industrialization transformed Europe with smoke, Factories, railroads, and expanding cities, many aristocratic families struggled to adapt. The Rothschilds adapted constantly. That adaptability became another key to their survival. They supported railways because they understood movement. They supported infrastructure because they understood continuity. They cultivated relationships across political divisions because they understood uncertainty. And throughout all these changes, they preserved the atmosphere of calm. Perhaps because they understood something profound. People make poor decisions when emotionally overwhelmed, so the family designed environments that reduced emotional chaos. Even their dining rooms reflected psychological strategy. Soft lighting relaxed guests. Warm meals slowed conversations. Silence was permitted instead of feared. The old wealthy classes of Europe often treated conversation itself like architecture. Built slowly, balanced carefully, never rushed. Late at night after formal dinners ended, certain Rothschild homes became almost dreamlike. Chandeliers dimmed. Servants extinguished candles room by room. Rain touched enormous windows overlooking gardens and fountains. Only a few lamps remained glowing in private studies where correspondence continued. The family's appetite for information never disappeared. Political changes, economic conditions, royal gossip, market psychology, every detail mattered. Not because they were obsessed with control in a dramatic sense, but because dynasties survive through awareness. The family also became famous collectors. Paintings, rare books, jewelry, furniture, architecture. But even these collections reflected old money psychology. The objects were not simply purchased. They were curated, integrated into atmosphere. A painting positioned where candlelight touched it softly during evening gatherings. A sculpture placed at the end of a silent hallway. A library arranged not for display but for emotional effect. This attention to sensory experience separated elite European culture from ordinary wealth. Luxury became immersive, not loud, immersive. As generations passed, the family developed countless quiet rituals invisible to outsiders. Certain chairs preferred by certain family members. Specific wines opened during winter dinners. Private codes within correspondence. Morning routines repeated for decades. These rituals created continuity, and continuity created emotional security. Outside the walls of these mansions, Europe moved toward modernity. Telegraphs accelerated communication. Cities expanded. Political revolutions shook old institutions. But inside many Rothschild homes, the atmosphere remained anchored in another rhythm entirely. A slower rhythm. The rhythm of clocks, libraries, fireplaces, rain against windows. There were nights in Paris when fog drifted through narrow streets, while guests departed Rothschild salons wrapped in heavy coats beneath gas lamps. Carriages disappeared slowly into the darkness. Inside the house, servants restored order quietly, silver polished, candles replaced, curtains closed. The great room settled back into silence, and somewhere above, perhaps unable to sleep, a family member sat alone reading letters from another city. London, Vienna, Frankfurt, Naples. The network still alive, still breathing, still connected through correspondence and memory. This may be the most fascinating aspect of the Rothschild story. Not simply their wealth, but their emotional continuity across generations, the ability to preserve atmosphere, to pass psychological habits from parent to child like heirlooms. Calmness, observation, discretion, patience, silence. As the 20th century approached, Europe changed again. Empires weakened. Modern finance evolved. New industrial fortunes appeared. Yet the Rothschild name retained an almost mythical quality because it belonged not only to business history, but to the dreamlike world of old European civilization itself. A world of candlelit libraries, private trains, country estates in rainstorms, late-night correspondence, quiet luxury, measured voices, and emotional controls so complete it almost resembled stillness. Even today, long after the horse-drawn carriages and handwritten banking ledgers of 19th century Europe have faded into history, the atmosphere surrounding the family remains hypnotic because the Rothschild story speaks to something deeper than money. It speaks to permanence, to the longing for protected spaces untouched by noise, to the fantasy of entering warm libraries while storms move outside, to the idea that somewhere beyond the frantic speed of ordinary life, there still exist quiet rooms where people think slowly beside candlelight. You can almost hear those rooms now. The soft turning of paper, a distant piano, the crackling fireplace, rain tapping gently against tall windows overlooking dark European gardens, and somewhere in the silence, a Rothschild banker pausing before replying, thinking carefully. As generations before him had done, the clocks continue ticking softly through the night. The candles burn lower. The great houses settle deeper into silence, and the old world of hidden wealth drifts onward through history like a dream that never fully disappears.